Could a single military strike redefine the course of a nation's conflict? The U.S. quote, "As recent deployment of a 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb in Yemen has left analysts and observers questioning its profound implications. Is this the beginning of a turning point, or are we witnessing another step in an endless cycle of war?" Yemen's descent into turmoil began in 2014 when the Houthi rebels, a group with deep-rooted political, economic, and sectarian grievances, launched an armed uprising that dramatically altered the country's power structure. Originating from the Zaydi Shia sect in northern Yemen, the Houthis had long felt marginalized by the central government in Sana'a. Their movement, officially known as Ansar Allah, initially emerged in the 1990s as a reaction to perceived government neglect and Saudi Arabian influence over Yemeni affairs. In September 2014, the Houthis capitalized on widespread discontent over fuel price hikes and government corruption, quickly advancing southward and seizing control of Sana'a. By early 2015, they had placed then-President Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi under house arrest, effectively toppling the internationally recognized government. Hadi managed to escape to the southern city of Aden before seeking refuge in Saudi Arabia, prompting Riyadh to intervene militarily. Saudi Arabia, along with a coalition of regional allies, launched a large-scale military campaign in March 2015, aiming to restore Hadi's government and push back the Houthis. The coalition, backed by the United States and other Western powers, conducted extensive airstrikes against Houthi-controlled areas, while the Houthis responded with cross-border missile attacks targeting Saudi cities. The conflict soon escalated into a brutal war, drawing in multiple factions, including separatist groups in the south and al-Qaeda elements that exploited the chaos to expand their influence. The war has triggered one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with millions of Yemenis suffering from food insecurity, disease outbreaks, and mass displacement. The blockade imposed by the Saudi-led coalition, intended to cut off Houthi supply lines, has severely restricted the flow of essential goods, leading to widespread famine-like conditions. Meanwhile, relentless airstrikes, indiscriminate shelling, and ground battles have left countless civilians dead or wounded, with international organizations accusing both sides of committing war crimes. Despite numerous attempts at peace talks, including UN-sponsored negotiations and intermittent ceasefires, the conflict remains unresolved. Over the years, shifting alliances, regional rivalries, and geopolitical interests have complicated efforts to reach a lasting settlement. The Houthis, increasingly emboldened and militarily capable, continue to hold significant territory, while Saudi Arabia and its allies have struggled to achieve a decisive victory. Meanwhile, ordinary Yemenis continue to bear the brunt of the war, with an entire generation growing up in the shadow of violence, poverty, and instability. With no clear end in sight, the Yemen conflict stands as a grim testament to the devastating consequences of war, external interventions, and political fragmentation in an already fragile state. In recent months, the Houthi rebels have significantly escalated their military operations, targeting international shipping lanes in the Red Sea, a critical maritime passage that facilitates global trade. Their attacks on commercial vessels, many of which belong to or are linked with Western nations, have alarmed the international community and triggered widespread concern about the security of one of the world's most vital trade routes. By disrupting maritime traffic, the Houthis aim to exert pressure on their adversaries, demonstrating their growing military capabilities while sending a clear message to the broader international community. The Houthis justify their actions as a response to Western support for Saudi Arabia and Israel, framing their attacks as part of a broader struggle against foreign intervention in the region. However, these aggressive maneuvers have intensified regional tensions, particularly given the group's deepening ties with Iran. Tehran has long provided the Houthis with financial, logistical, and military assistance, including advanced weaponry such as drones and ballistic missiles. This partnership has fueled accusations that the Houthis are acting as an Iranian proxy, using asymmetric warfare to challenge U.S. and Western interests in the Middle East. The United States and its allies have been closely monitoring the Houthis' growing influence, and the recent surge in attacks provided a pretext for direct military intervention. In response to repeated assaults on commercial and naval vessels, the U.S. has launched airstrikes targeting Houthi military infrastructure in Yemen. These strikes, coordinated with the United Kingdom and supported by other Western nations, mark a significant escalation in the conflict, bringing Washington into more direct confrontation with the group. The Biden administration has justified these operations as necessary to protect international shipping and maintain regional stability, arguing that unchecked Houthi aggression threatens global economic interests. While the U.S. intervention is framed as a defensive measure, its involvement risks further entrenching the conflict. The Houthis, emboldened by years of defiance against Saudi-led coalitions, have vowed retaliation, raising the possibility of prolonged hostilities. Additionally, U.S. strikes could deepen Iranian involvement, potentially widening the scope of the conflict beyond Yemen's borders. The situation remains highly volatile, with fears that miscalculations or escalatory responses could trigger a broader regional crisis. As tensions mount, diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation face significant challenges. While the U.S. and its allies emphasize the need to secure Red Sea trade routes, the Houthis see external military action as validation of their struggle. The coming months will be crucial in determining whether the crisis spirals into a more extensive confrontation, or if diplomatic channels can prevent a further descent into war. In a decisive and unprecedented military action, the U.S. Air Force executed a series of precision airstrikes on October 17, 2024, targeting 5 underground Houthi facilities in Yemen. This operation marked a significant escalation in Washington's direct involvement in the conflict and underscored its commitment to deterring further Houthi aggression in the region. At the heart of this mission was the deployment of the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, MOP, a 30,000-pound bunker buster designed to destroy fortified underground structures. This bomb, one of the most powerful non-nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal, was specifically engineered to penetrate deeply buried targets before detonating, making it the perfect choice for eliminating hardened Houthi command centers and weapons storage sites. The MOP's deployment was not a routine military maneuver. It was a calculated show of force. The Houthi rebels have long used underground bunkers and tunnel networks to shield their leadership, weapons caches, and missile launch sites from aerial bombardment. Traditional airstrikes, while effective against surface-level targets, have often failed to neutralize these heavily fortified positions. By employing the MOP, the U.S. sent a clear message. No bunker or underground facility was beyond its reach. The strike was intended to cripple the Houthis' operational capacity and deter further attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea. However, the use of such an extreme weapon raises important strategic and ethical questions. Was this level of force justified, or does it set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts? The U.S. framed the strike as a necessary response to Houthi provocations, particularly their continued assaults on commercial and military vessels. Yet, critics argue that resorting to a weapon of this magnitude risks further destabilizing an already volatile region. The MOP's sheer destructive power increases the likelihood of collateral damage, despite Pentagon assurances that the strikes were carefully planned to minimize civilian casualties. Additionally, the decision to use the MOP could further entrench Iran's involvement in Yemen, as Tehran may view such an escalation as an attack not just on its Houthi allies, but on its broader regional influence. If the Houthis respond with more sophisticated missile and drone attacks, or if Iran steps up its support, the conflict could spiral into a larger confrontation, dragging in more regional and global powers. Ultimately, while the bunker buster strike showcased U.S. military superiority, it also underscored the risks of escalation. Whether this bold move deters future Houthi aggression or ignites a broader conflict remains uncertain, but its implications for regional security will be felt for years to come. The U.S. airstrike, featuring the deployment of the 30,000-pound Massive Ordnance Penetrator, MOP, was aimed at crippling the Houthis' subterranean arsenals and command centers, potentially altering the balance of power in Yemen. By targeting underground bunkers that house critical weapons stockpiles, missile launch sites, and leadership hubs, Washington sought to weaken the Houthis' ability to sustain attacks on international shipping lanes and allied forces in the region. While this operation demonstrated the U.S.'s advanced military capabilities and willingness to escalate its role in the conflict, its broader impact remains uncertain. Military analysts caution that such strikes may not achieve their intended long-term objectives. The Houthis have demonstrated remarkable resilience throughout years of war, continuously adapting their tactics in response to air campaigns. Previous bombardments by the Saudi-led coalition failed to dismantle their operational capacity, as the rebels quickly rebuilt infrastructure and relocated key assets. The latest U.S. strike, though devastating, may only serve as a temporary setback rather than a decisive blow. Instead of weakening the Houthis, it could provoke an even fiercer retaliation, leading to a cycle of escalating violence. The risk of escalation is particularly concerning given the Houthis' strong ties to Iran, which has provided military and logistical support to the group, while Tehran has denied direct involvement in Houthi attacks. Its backing has enabled the rebels to acquire increasingly sophisticated missile and drone technology. A more aggressive U.S. military posture in Yemen could prompt Iran to deepen its involvement, supplying the Houthis with more advanced weaponry or even directly challenging U.S. forces in the region. Such a development could ignite a broader confrontation beyond Yemen's borders, dragging in multiple regional and global powers. Beyond strategic concerns, the ethical ramifications of deploying such a powerful bomb cannot be ignored. Despite claims that the strikes were executed with precision, Yemen's densely populated areas are in close proximity to many Houthi military sites. The potential for civilian casualties and infrastructure damage remains high, raising moral questions about the proportionality of U.S. actions. International humanitarian organizations have long criticized airstrikes in Yemen for their devastating impact on civilians, and this latest escalation risks further alienating the local population, potentially driving more Yemenis to support the Houthis rather than weakening them. Ultimately, the use of overwhelming military force carries significant risks. If the goal was to deter future Houthi attacks, it remains to be seen whether this strategy will succeed or backfire. Rather than de-escalating the situation, this strike may have inadvertently set the stage for a more protracted and volatile conflict, with consequences that extend far beyond Yemen's borders. The U.S. airstrike against Houthi underground facilities has sent shockwaves beyond Yemen's borders, intensifying tensions between Washington and Tehran while reshaping the broader geopolitical landscape. Iran, which has long provided financial, logistical, and military support to the Houthis, immediately condemned the strike, labeling it an act of aggression and warning of potential retaliatory measures. This escalation further strains already fragile U.S.-Iran relations, raising concerns that Tehran might step up its involvement in the conflict by supplying more advanced weaponry or directly challenging U.S. and allied forces in the region. For Iran, the Houthis serve as a critical proxy force, allowing Tehran to exert influence in the Arabian Peninsula and pressure its regional rivals, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, UAE. By striking Houthi positions, the U.S. has directly challenged Iran's regional strategy, a move that could prompt Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon to launch attacks on American assets or Gulf allies. The possibility of a broader regional conflict looms large, with analysts warning that further escalation could lead to a wider U.S.-Iran confrontation, potentially disrupting global oil markets and destabilizing an already volatile Middle East. The international response to the U.S. strike has been deeply divided. Some Western nations, particularly the United Kingdom and France, have expressed support, arguing that decisive action is necessary to protect international shipping lanes and deter Houthi aggression. These nations view the strike as a preventive measure to safeguard global trade and maintain stability in the Red Sea, a key artery for global commerce. However, other nations, including Russia and China, have been critical, portraying the U.S. action as an unnecessary escalation that risks plunging the region into deeper conflict. Both countries have strengthened diplomatic and economic ties with Iran in recent years, and they could use this incident to challenge U.S. influence in the Middle East, either by advocating for diplomatic interventions that exclude Washington or by increasing military cooperation with Iran and its allies. Meanwhile, regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE find themselves in a precarious position. While they welcome any effort to weaken the Houthis, they also fear being drawn into a larger war. Saudi Arabia has been seeking to de-escalate tensions with Iran, engaging in diplomatic talks to end the Yemen conflict. A sudden intensification of hostilities could derail those peace efforts and push Riyadh back into a direct military confrontation with the Houthis. With tensions mounting, the central question remains: could this be the spark that ignites a larger, more devastating war? The potential for escalation is undeniable, and the coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether diplomatic efforts can contain the crisis or if the region is headed toward a wider and more dangerous conflict. As the dust settles, one must ponder, is this the decisive action that will alter Yemen's trajectory, or does it risk entrenching a protracted conflict? The answers remain uncertain, urging us to reflect on the complexities of foreign intervention and its lasting impact on regional disputes. What happens next could shape the future of the Middle East for years to come. What do you think? Is this a necessary move to stop further chaos, or is it another miscalculated step in an endless war? Let us know in the comments below.